How many of these activities bring us any joy at all? I would guess that we tend to do most of them somewhat grudgingly, without having anything like a full awareness of the environment in which we're doing them. At those moments, all kinds of things are going on around us, but we tend not to notice because we're just trying to get done with them and get on to the next thing or the next place. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the old adage, think before you act. Or in Buddhist parlance, take 3 deep breaths. How many times, especially in this city, do we find ourselves poised to respond quickly to something that annoys or jolts us? Someone quickly steps in front of you, almost knocking you over as you prepare to enter the bus or the subway without saying, "Excuse me." Or a reckless taxi driver almost runs over your foot. The normal, immediate reaction, and it's normal in such a situation, is for your adrenaline to start pumping more quickly, and the temptation is to lash out either physically or verbally, and then that's a totally understandable reaction. And the feeling comes from its own accord. It's not bidden, it just, you find yourself feeling that. But I do think we have a choice of what we do in those situations, or we can develop a sense of that choice. As we feel about to say or do something which we usually end up regretting and sometimes can get us into real trouble. People get shot in this city sometimes in the summer for taking somebody else's parking space. We have the option of stopping and taking a few deep breaths before reacting. And it's amazing when we can do this, what a difference those few moments, those few breaths can make. And this is something that I think is also really important. I say this as a therapist and marriage counselor and family counselor. In our close relationships, our spouse or significant other or some other family member may say something that is very hurtful, and we all experience this from time to time. The words that would first want to come out of our mouths in those situations tend to be exaggerated and unfortunate. Words like, "Well, then why don't we just split up if that's what you feel," for example. Just 3 deep breaths can separate us from that kind of statement, or something more measured like, "That really hurt," or "I'm really angry at you when you talk like that." And sometimes our reactions, furthermore, are based on total misperceptions, which makes it all the more embarrassing and unfortunate. I think of, here's another personal example, of the elevator in the building in which I live. There are certain people who tend to hold the elevator for long periods of time before they get on. You know, they're coming out the door, but they really haven't put their coat on, and the other people haven't come out the door yet, but they're holding the elevator, and which is obviously annoying. And the culprits are usually predictable. It's on certain floors. But I live on the 10th floor, so I know where it stops, where it stays. But on one recent occasion, when the elevator seemed stuck forever on a floor where one of the residents does this, I found myself banging with my keys on the little window in the door of the elevator on my floor to indicate my frustration. And I have to say, I was embarrassed and ashamed to discover that in this case, it had taken so long because there was a crippled woman having difficulty putting her wheelchair onto the elevator on the floor that was taking so long. Just a few deep breaths could have made a difference. Or a Thich Nhat Hanh type exercise, meditating while waiting for the elevator. When we rush to judgment or react reflexively rather than mindfully, our environment becomes like the words in the song, Merzidos and Dozidots, meaningless and often misunderstood. But if we could just slow down and see that mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy, taking in the fullness of what we're experiencing both within ourselves and in the environment, I think what a difference that can make. This was driven home to me in rather dramatic fashion when I had my serious accident last year when I was hit by a car in California, which many of you know, and spent several weeks lying still on my back. It's amazing when you can't move without great pain, and when getting from bed to a wheelchair is a 5-minute ordeal, It's amazing in those moments how you notice details that normally would escape you. Things like patterns on the ceiling or on the walls. I could count these little ridges on the ceiling. Or things like the songs of songbirds on tree branches outside the window, or just how the wind hits the curtain a certain way when it's blowing a certain direction. That accident really slowed me down. And as I reported here several months later in a Dharma talk, there was something very wonderful about being slowed down in that way. I didn't rush anywhere because I couldn't. I physically couldn't. And if I couldn't go somewhere because I wasn't physically up to it in the months following that accident, then I didn't go and I didn't sweat it. And I didn't feel guilty about it. And the sense of freedom that came with that was like the lifting of a tremendous weight from my shoulders. I think I learned some lessons from that experience that have stuck with me, but I'm also aware that I haven't been able to keep that perspective as much as I would like now that I've been healthy for the last several months. I catch myself rushing again, as evidenced in my example of my rush to the west side when I leave here on Sunday mornings. And when I'm aware of rushing, I try to stop it when I am aware, because I know only too well that it just isn't worth it. But it's a constant struggle to keep that perspective. I think the old mantra, less is more, really applies here. This is something I've learned in many ways, but once as a jazz pianist. When I'm comping or playing behind a soloist, the temptation is to try to fill all the empty spaces with notes. But a wise piano teacher that I had helped me to see that sometimes the spaces with no notes make the biggest impact. And that's true in so many kinds of art. Take flower arranging, for example. Every Sunday we see wonderful flower arrangements in the front of the temple. Have you ever noticed that it's never a question of bunches of flowers being stuffed together in a vase? It's usually a question of just a few flowers, a simple branch or two, and perhaps a few leaves arranged in just such a way as to convey a peaceful sense of beauty and space. A great example of how less is more. There was a funny movie that came out many years ago, actually a very corny movie. It was called If It's Tuesday, It Must Be Belgium. It was about the typical American bus tour in Europe where one sees 10 countries in 10 days, spending a lot more time on the bus than enjoying the cities and countries that are being visited. When we travel, it's a real temptation to do that because we get caught up in the idea that quantity matters more than quality. Forgetting that 10 days of relaxed exploration in one city can be much more satisfying and relaxing than one day in each of 10 different cities. The famous photographer Alfred Stieglitz had an exercise that he used with students in his photography classes in New York City. He said, I want you to shoot 10 rolls of film without leaving the premises of the house or apartment in which you live. When you pay attention, you'll be amazed at the fascinating images and treasures that you'll find there. Initially, students were disappointed. What? We're in this wonderful city so full of photogenic landscapes, and you're telling us to stay at home for this assignment? Yet, when the assignment was finished, the students almost universally agreed that this was incredibly instructive, that you don't have to have a dramatic subject like the Empire State Building, the Taj Mahal, or the Eiffel Tower to take pleasing photographs. Again, less is more. This is illustrated beautifully in a story that is taught in Taoism. It's about a village in China more than 1,000 years ago that was experiencing a major drought that was killing off the crops. The rainmakers in the village were running around rapidly, madly using incantations and dramatic gestures to try to bring rain, but to no avail. Finally, in desperation, they decided to send for a renowned rainmaker who lived some distance away. He came to the village. He spent some time talking to the people who lived there to get a sense of the place. Then he said, I want to be left alone now. He went to the outskirts of the village and built himself a small shed. He spent the next 3 days and nights alone in the shed. The people in the village were mystified, wondering what he could possibly be doing. And after 3 days he emerged, disassembled the shed, and started to leave. When the villagers tried to question him, he waved them off and left. What a sham that was, they all said. But the next day, to their amazement, the rains came, and it rained steadily for several days, saving the crops that they had planted that season. The people were amazed. How had he done this? They sent a messenger to ask him. And his response was, "When I came to your village, I saw that the people in this village were nervous and frantic. They were not in Tao. They were not centered and calm. So I built myself a shed, and for 3 days I meditated and put myself in a state of Tao." Less is more. If you slow it down, it will make more sense. I think we all know that this is what meditative practice is really all about. Brain studies show that meditation literally slows the brain down. When you live in a place like New York City where there is such constant audio and visual stimulation, our brains literally get overstimulated. I know if I'm down at Macy's at Christmas time, I can make it about 20 minutes so I start going crazy. We take in more data than we can process. And this takes a toll on our minds and on our bodies. Brain scans of people doing meditation have shown conclusively that the process of meditating slows down the rapid firing of neurons within the brain, which in turn lowers blood pressure and clarifies the thinking process. Also, paradoxically, when we go inward and meditate, we seem to become much more tuned into our environment and much more aware of what is going on around us. Our senses become more finely tuned because we learn, when meditating, how to keep disturbing and distracting thoughts at a distance. And the more we succeed at doing this when meditating, the more we're able to call up this skill at other times during the day. This was demonstrated by researchers in neural processing. They discovered that if you connect a calm and meditative state with a physical stance or gesture, that physical movement can be used to cue the meditative state when you're feeling stress. For example, if you do as I do when I meditate, I put my thumb and third finger together and hold them in that position on my lap. If you find yourself in a stressful situation and you put your fingers on your lap in that way, when you're feeling stressed, you will find that your body may suddenly go into a calm and meditative state because the brain remembers the association and responds to it. If you slow it down, it will make more sense. It's really a pretty simple formula, and yet, as we all know, such a difficult one to put into practice. And while none of us will probably ever totally master this, I think it's something that hopefully we can all make inroads into. And this is on the top of my list of resolutions for 2011. And this year I hope that I can make some progress in slowing things down, that I can achieve more inner calm by slowing down my mind and body in this wonderful but crazy and hectic city. And I certainly wish the same for you in this new year.